My mother begged me to come home. Not for a celebration, not for a wedding or a funeral, not even for one of those milestone birthdays people like to post about online. She begged me in that tired, trembling voice she reserved for moments when she wanted something from me but needed it to sound like love. It was the middle of the night where I was because my life wasn't even in the same time zone as hers anymore, and she had my face on her screen, eyes wet, hand pressed to her chest saying, "We don't see you. We need you. The whole family needs you. Just come home." I'm Marin Holt. I'm 31. And I wish I could tell you I heard that and felt warmth. The truth is, I felt something closer to dread, like the moment your stomach tightens before a bad meeting you can't skip. I had learned slowly and painfully that in my family, "we need you" almost never meant "we miss you." It meant there was a gap in their life they expected me to fill. Money, time, labor. A buffer between their choices and their consequences. Still, I said yes. I booked the flight. I packed gifts for my nephew and niece. I told myself it could be different this time. Not because I was naive exactly, but because hope is stubborn and the version of me who still wanted a normal family kept waking up every time I tried to put her to sleep. The travel day was the kind of day that makes you feel like you don't belong to your own body. A long overnight flight, an extra connection because the cheapest options always came with discomfort, an airport meal that tasted like cardboard, and a phone battery that crawled towards zero while I watched the charging stations like they were a privilege I hadn't earned. By the time I dragged my suitcase down my parents' front steps in a quiet neighborhood outside their city, my back ached and my eyes felt gritty. I looked at the familiar porch light and felt that small, ridiculous flutter in my chest, just the tiniest hope that my mother would open the door and for 1 second act like I was her child and not her solution. I rang the bell. I took a breath. The door swung open quickly like she'd been waiting right behind it. And then my hope died in one clean motion. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for me. She didn't even look at my face first. Her eyes went to my suitcase like it was a tool she'd ordered online and wasn't sure arrived on time. "Good," she said, like I was a delivery. "You're here. You'll take the kids. We're heading out." Not, "How was the flight?" Not, "I'm glad you made it," just instructions. Behind her, my brother stepped into view with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, already wearing that restless, excited look he always got when he was about to do something fun that someone else paid for. His two kids were bouncing and clinging and whining full of energy, and he glanced at me like I was a piece of furniture that had finally been moved into the right room. He smirked and said something small and cruel, the kind of joke that only lands if everyone agrees you're not worth basic respect. His kids laughed because they were kids, and laughter is a language they learn from adults. My mother laughed quick and relieved, like she needed the mood to stay light, so she didn't have to notice what she was doing. My father appeared behind them, already holding car keys, already half turned away, like the scene was settled. And the moment they laughed at me like I was harmless, like I was automatic, I felt something click inside me quietly, completely, like a switch flipping off. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even argue. I smiled in the way I'd learned to smile at work when a client tried to pressure me into something unreasonable, the kind of smile that looks polite until you realize it's also a boundary. I set my suitcase down just inside the entryway. I looked directly at my mother, and I said one calm sentence. "Before anyone goes anywhere, we need to sit down and go over what I've been paying for." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't dramatic. It was factual, like a line in a contract. The laughter stopped. My brother's smirk faltered like he'd stepped on ice. My father's posture stiffened, and my mother's face changed in a way I recognized immediately, that flash of panic she got when she sensed her version of the story might not hold up. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She whispered almost to herself, "No. No." No. Like she was trying to rewind time. Like she understood in that instant that I hadn't flown all this way to be used. I'd flown all this way because I was done pretending. To understand why that one sentence landed like a brick, you need to know what the last few years had looked like. My family didn't start by asking for everything. They started by asking just this once. Just this once, can you help with a shortfall? Just this once, can you cover a bill until payday? Just this once, can you put it on your card, and we'll pay you back? And because I was raised to believe that being good meant being useful, I said yes. When my father's medical expenses came up, I sent money. When my brother's business idea turned into late fees and a pile of charges, I helped him get on his feet. When my mother called, sounding stressed about utilities and groceries, I wired a few hundred like it was nothing. I lived smaller than I needed to cook at home, reused things, kept my expenses predictable because stability mattered to me. Meanwhile, I watched their social media fill up with little treats and new purchases, and weekend outings always framed as, "We deserve this." The math never added up, but I wasn't allowed to question it. The moment I asked where the money went, my mother's voice would sharpen. "So now you're keeping score." My father would go cold. "We didn't raise you to be like this." My brother would joke and minimize. "Relax. It's family. Don't make it weird." And every time the message was the same, my boundaries were the problem, not their behavior. Then a few months before that late-night call, I noticed something that made my stomach turn for a different reason. An alert from a lender addressed to me referencing a loan I didn't remember choosing. I dug. I read. I stared at the names on the documents until they blurred. My name was tied to their home financing in a way that went beyond helping out. Not just sending money when things got tight, but being connected to the obligation itself. Years ago, they'd framed it as a harmless formality paperwork that helped the approval, something that wouldn't impact me. I had been younger then, trusting in the way you trust the people who are supposed to protect you. I had signed where I was told. I hadn't understood what it meant until I saw the pattern every time the payment didn't clear, every time there was a temporary issue, every time I sent money to catch it up. It wasn't just their problem. It reached into my life too. It touched my credit, my future plans, my ability to move forward without dragging their weight behind me. And when my mother called sobbing about how the family needed me, I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand and realized the truth I'd been resisting. The only time my family treated me like I belonged was when they needed something covered. So I booked the flight. But I didn't book it like the old me would have. I booked it like someone preparing to end a pattern. I spent the weeks leading up to the trip collecting evidence, not to punish them, not to ruin them, but to keep myself from being gaslit again. I downloaded statements. I pulled transaction histories. I saved messages where my mother thanked me and promised repayment once things settled. I highlighted patterns that made me feel sick, requests that conveniently lined up with shopping weekends, new subscriptions that appeared after emergencies, little expenses that weren't emergencies at all. I also scheduled a call with an advisor, someone calm, methodical, and not emotionally tangled in my last name, so I could understand what my options were and what untangling would actually look like. And I prepared a simple document, not a lawsuit, not a public shaming, just a written acknowledgement of reality, what I had paid, what it amounted to, and what I was no longer willing to pretend. That's why standing in my parents' entryway while my brother's kids bounced around my legs and my mother treated me like a built-in staff member, I didn't react like they expected. I asked my mother to gather everyone at the table so we can go over a few things before you head out. She tried to smile and make it sound normal. She tried to keep the tone light like she could keep control through atmosphere. My father sat down like it was his house, and therefore his meeting. My brother slouched in his chair, phone in hand, half listening, the posture of a man who assumed the conversation would end with him getting what he wanted. I opened my laptop. I turned the screen so they could see. And I spoke quietly, slowly, like I was reading a report. I'm going to walk you through what I've covered. My brother groaned. My mother tried the wounded voice. My father muttered something about timing. I didn't take the bait. I opened a spreadsheet. Dates, amounts, notes, screenshots. Everything clean and unavoidable. I went line by line, not with anger, but with accuracy. The room changed with each scroll. My brother's face drained when he saw his own promises in the memo lines. My mother's hand flew to her mouth when she recognized her texts paired with transfers. My father's jaw tightened when he saw that the money wasn't occasional, it was structural. It was the foundation they'd been standing on, while telling themselves they were just going through a rough patch. When I reached the total, I didn't announce it like a victory. I just said it. Over the last 3 years, I've sent or covered a little over $60,000. Silence filled the space like water. My mother whispered again, "No, no, no." My father stared at the table as if numbers were a personal insult. My brother blinked hard like he could clear the screen by force of will. Then I placed the document on the table, thin, simple, almost modest compared to the glossy brochures and travel confirmations spread nearby. "This is an agreement," I said. "It says you acknowledge this wasn't a gift. It says you'll repay what you can slowly over time. It's a boundary in writing." My father snapped into indignation. "We're family," he said, like the word should erase the last 3 years. My brother scoffed. My mother tried to cry. I kept my voice level. Family doesn't move obligations into someone else's name and then act surprised when she asks what she's attached to. Then I clicked to the next tab, the travel tab. The confirmation details they thought were theirs. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just pointed. This reservation was made using my card. My mother's eyes widened. "No." She said the word thin and scared. "No, you wouldn't." My brother leaned forward, suddenly paying attention. My father frowned, still not understanding. I pointed to the status line. "Cancelled." My father half stood as if he could physically undo it. My brother's voice rose. My mother started whispering again, faster this time, the same word over and over like prayer. I let them sit in the shock for a moment, not to be cruel, but because this was the first time they'd had to feel the immediate impact of treating me like an inexhaustible resource. "There is no getaway," I said softly. "Not on my account. Not with my money. Not while I'm standing here being assigned childcare like I'm a favor you can schedule." That should have been the end. In most stories, that's where the triumphant music kicks in. But real life doesn't resolve that quickly, and quiet revenge isn't fireworks, it's consequences that keep arriving after the moment everyone thinks it's over. Because canceling the trip wasn't the point. It was a symbol. The real issue was the house, and the financial tether I didn't consent to carry forever. I pulled up the lender email, both our names listed, my mother's face tightening, as if the screen itself was offensive. I didn't accuse. I asked one simple question. What exactly did you think would happen if I stopped covering gaps? My father tried to turn it into morality. My mother tried to turn it into emotion. My brother tried to turn it into panic. I stayed on the facts. "I've already spoken to someone who explained what this means," I said. "And I'm going to fix what I can fix." I didn't need to humiliate them with a lecture. I didn't need to punish them with drama. I only needed to stop participating. I made a few decisions that day that felt small in the moment, but they were the kind of decisions that changed the shape of your future. I told them I would be ending every automatic payment I controlled that was tied to their household. Not to sabotage them, but to stop quietly subsidizing their choices without consent. I told them I would no longer be available for emergencies that were actually patterns. I told them that if they chose to tell other people a story where I was cold and selfish, I would not counter with emotion. I would counter with receipts. It's amazing how quickly family becomes timing and stress, and you're being dramatic when the person funding the comfort stops writing checks. My brother tried to bargain. My mother tried to guilt me. My father tried to threaten me with exile. And that was the moment I understood something painful and clarifying. They believed they could remove me emotionally the moment I wasn't useful financially. They didn't realize I had already been removed. I had been standing in their lives like a pillar they leaned on, but they hadn't looked at my face in years. I left that house the same day, suitcase rolling behind me, my hands shaking in a way I didn't show at the table. I didn't have nowhere to go. Months earlier, quietly, without announcements, without permission, I had secured a small place in the same region. Not because I planned to show them, but because I had learned to stop waiting for my family to make room for me. I had learned to make my own room. I arrived at my place and stood in the quiet, looking at bare walls and a half-furnished living room, and felt something that wasn't happiness exactly. It was relief mixed with grief. Relief that my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. Grief that it had taken so long for me to accept that love shouldn't cost this much. The first wave of consequences didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came like mail, notices, billing cycles, requests for updated information, the kinds of systems my parents had learned to ignore because I always made things smooth at the last second. Without me slipping money into the cracks became visible. A payment came due and didn't get covered by my quiet transfer. A utility balance rolled over and suddenly required attention. A lender asked questions that couldn't be answered with a sigh and a story about stress. My mother texted in bursts, fear disguised as anger, then fear disguised as pleading. "What did you do? Why are we getting these letters? This is too much at once." I didn't respond to every message. I responded when it mattered and only with clarity. I stopped paying. I stopped being responsible for what I don't control. My brother, for the first time, didn't joke. He called. His voice sounded unfamiliar, smaller, stripped of entitlement. "Can we meet?" he asked. Not to apologize, not yet, but because he finally understood that the safety net wasn't automatic. When we met, he looked worn down. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a grown man who had been allowed to stay a child for too long. He admitted in halting pieces that he hadn't realized how much I covered because it never felt like something he had to handle. He'd always assumed it would work out. He'd always assumed someone else would take care of it. He didn't say my name at first, but we both knew who someone else had been. I listened. I didn't comfort him the way I used to. I didn't punish him either. I said, "You're going to figure out what your life costs. That's what adults do." He looked down, jaw tight, then nodded like he hated me and respected me at the same time. That was the start of his delayed consequence, not a ruined life, not a dramatic downfall, but the slow, unavoidable weight of reality pressing on his shoulders. My father's consequence came differently. He tried to outsource shame the way he always did by controlling the narrative. He posted online, vague, dramatic lines about children forgetting who raised them, about being abandoned, about sacrifice. People who hadn't done the math gave him sympathy. People who liked his posts didn't know they'd been watching a performance sponsored by my bank transfers. I felt the old panic rise when I saw it, the urge to fix, to smooth, to prove I wasn't a monster. And then I remembered the doorway, the lack of hello, the lack of hug, the way my mother looked at my suitcase like I was hired help. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't fight for an image in a story that was never honest. I saved screenshots. I kept records. I kept my dignity. Quiet revenge is often just refusing to run back into the burning building you used to call home. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, predictably, my family began to live inside the consequences they used to push onto me. They sold things, not for drama, but because budgets don't care about pride. My brother picked up more work. My mother took extra shifts. The household got smaller in ways no one posted about. They stopped pretending their comfort was a birthright. My father kept trying to blame me, but blame doesn't pay bills. And the truth is, I didn't want them destroyed. I wanted them honest. I wanted them to stop living as if my adulthood belonged to them. The strangest part was how the delayed justice arrived not as a grand victory, but as a quiet shift in power. One afternoon, my mother showed up at my door unannounced. She looked different. Not dramatically so, but enough that I could see the effort had worn off. Less polish, less performance, more tiredness. She stood in my small living room and turned slowly, taking in the simple furniture, the ordinary life I'd built without funding theirs. She said softly, "I didn't know you lived like this." It wasn't an insult. It was confusion. She had always imagined my life as larger, more glamorous, more endless, because in her mind, if I had more than them, then taking from me felt justified. I told her calmly, "This is what I can afford when I'm not paying for two households." She flinched like the words had weight. She brought an envelope. Inside was a check. Not a miracle. Not a full repayment. Just to start an actual reversal of flow money moving toward me for once, instead of away. She explained where it came from in short, practical sentences, selling items, cutting extras, taking shifts, doing what adults do when there's no one left to rescue them. Then she did something I hadn't heard from her in years. She said, "We used you." Not as a dramatic confession, not as a sobbing plea, just a statement of fact. She admitted she had let my father and brother turn me into the solution because it kept her from facing the discomfort of conflict. She admitted she had enjoyed the comfort while telling herself it was temporary. She didn't ask me to fix it. She asked tentatively if we could ever have a normal visit again, one where my presence wasn't attached to a bill. I didn't promise her a happy ending. I didn't punish her with cruelty. I said the only honest thing. Maybe. But only if you all understand I'm not your safety net anymore. If I come, it's because I want to, not because you've scheduled me into your life like a service. My father never came to my door. He never apologized. His pride mattered more to him than the truth. And that was his delayed consequence, not homelessness, not catastrophe, but distance he couldn't control. He could post. He could blame. He could call me ungrateful. But he couldn't rewrite my bank statements. He couldn't unsign what he'd done. He couldn't force me back into the role of silent rescuer without my consent. Eventually, I muted him. Then I blocked him. It didn't feel like slamming a door. It felt like closing a wound that refused to heal because I kept reopening it with hope. The night I blocked him, I sat alone in my quiet place with a warm drink and a simple lamp on, and I listened to the silence. No frantic calls, no guilt-laced messages, no sudden emergencies that somehow always appeared when people wanted to shop travel or avoid responsibility. Just quiet. Just mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, I felt something steady for the first time in my adult life, the sense that my life belonged to me, not to the story my family told about me. That's the part people don't talk about. Setting boundaries doesn't make you instantly happy. It makes you honest. And honesty can feel lonely at first because you're no longer surrounded by people who like you best when you're useful. Here's what I learned the hard way. The people who truly love you may not like your boundaries at first, but they will adjust because your dignity matters to them. The people who only loved what you provided will call you selfish the moment you stop bleeding. And if you've spent years being the quiet fixer, the one who keeps everything from falling apart, it can feel like you're doing something cruel when you finally step back. But stepping back isn't cruelty. It's reality. It's letting adults meet their own lives. It's refusing to fund disrespect. It's choosing calmly to stop being the punchline at the door with a suitcase in your hand. So let me ask you something, because I know I'm not the only one who has lived this. If the people draining your money, your time, and your peace share your last name, would you keep paying just to be called loyal? Or would you do the quiet thing, the difficult thing, and finally let your absence become the consequence they can't laugh off anymore?